everybody. Sean Sewell, Engearment.com podcast. Really excited to have my friend Pat Flynn on for the fifth time. Fifth time, Pat? That's great.
What? That's crazy. That's awesome. Well, always a joy to be here, Sean. I still can't get over how good your setup looks. So if people can't see the video right now, it's a blurred background with some guitars, some kettlebells. It's like my dream setup. I'm super jealous over here.
Oh, thanks, Pat. It's actually, you know what, this is kind of a fun topic to talk about as more and more of us, well, probably most all of us are using Zoom and FaceTime and Duo and all these ways to talk and communicate, whether with friends and family or for service providing like what you do. This is totally doable. This setup, just a capture card, because a lot of webcams are out of stock, as people are finding out. Capture cards like $80 using a mirrorless camera, and you get this kind of output. Also, it helps to have a great wife who's very creative artistically to help lay this stuff out in the background.
This looks well organized. By the way, it's a little blurry, but is that an SG I see in the background? Because if so,
yes, it is.
There's mine right here.
Oh, look at nice pickups.
Yeah,
nice.
that's been my primary guitar for the past couple of years. I love the balance of it. You know, you can be speedy enough, but the feel is great. The tone is awesome. It's just such a nice guitar.
You know, I love it too. It was never on my radar. That was a gift from my wife 4 years ago, I think. And she did her homework. That guitar can do, like you said, do everything and do it very well. It's just underrated guitar for sure.
Yeah, it's funny because we've talked about this before. My biggest musical influence growing up was AC/DC, and Angus Young plays an SG. But for whatever reason, I was never interested in having an SG. And then I finally played one, and immediately I'm like, I need to have this guitar.
Oh, for
right
sure.
now.
Yeah, right now. Yeah, you're right. The way it feels is just so, it just feels right. And
yeah, I like it more than the Les Paul, to be frank.
Yeah, you know what? I'm with you on that. I had a friend, I had a really bad band called Warm Pinot Grigio. I
love that name.
Yeah. It's a funny creation story to it, involving mushrooms and a festival. But and warm white wine. Don't drink warm white wine. But he was a collector of classic guitars. So he had Telecasters, Stratocasters, Jaguars, Les Pauls, the BB King one, you know, the bigger one, all the guitars. And yeah, the Les Paul is a fantastic guitar. But it's really heavy.
By the way, interesting side fact maybe for some listeners is I live in Waukesha County, which is his hometown. We have a Les Paul museum 7.5 minutes from my house, maybe.
So amazing. What's it like there? I mean, like, just a bunch of Les Paul guitars and the history of him?
You know, it's so my stepsister had a wedding in the Waukesha, I think it's the old courthouse, and it's at the bottom of that courthouse where there's a museum and there's kind of a Les Paul tribute. So there's some of his guitars. I only visited it once briefly, so I might get some of the details wrong. But it's a nice little thing. It's not some gigantic building in and of itself. Yeah.
But it's down the street from you. That's super cool.
Right.
Yeah, can't beat that. So, we have a lot to cover. A lot of fun stuff. As always, it's super easy to talk with you. And like before, when I push record, obviously the last 3 months, haven't been driving a lot. Here in Denver, we had a 10-mile bubble restriction, and we did my best to stay within it. They loosened that about 2 weeks ago. And a couple of podcasts ago, we talked about suffering and going without. And so for me, going without, well, two of my main businesses, train people in person, that's, you know, still going without that. But going without one of my favorite things, which is splitboarding, right, in mountains. So I got a chance to go up to the mountains with my dogs and just soak it in, like just soak in the beauty of the mountains and the nature. And on the way there, listen to your podcast. This is when I listen to your podcast, right? And the one I was listening to is with you and Dan John, and it's always a pleasure to listen to you guys talk and like take on questions from the viewers and listeners. And the one that was kind of caught my attention was one of the herbs that you're taking right now. It's something I take too, ashwagandha.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty cool stuff. What do you experience with the ashwagandha?
Well, for supplements generally, I always like to lay out a couple of principles, because there's often these kind of two extremes. And I don't think the far side of say the opinion spectrum is always wrong, but sometimes it is. So there's kind of two extremes in the fitness industry. One is that supplements can do a lot more than people suppose, right? Supplements are the answer. That's clearly a mistaken and misleading. Supplements by their very name should always be in addition to, never instead of.
Mm-hmm.
But there's the other extreme, which tries to write off all supplements or considers all supplements equal or worthless, and that's not true either.
Yeah.
And there's actually been a ton of research done into supplementations, various forms of. So what you have to do is you have to kind of roll up your sleeves,
Mm-hmm.
and you just have to look at the research and say, well, what research has been done? Is it good research? And is there any evidence that any supplements might be useful for any particular outcomes? And the answer is, yeah, there is.
Mm-hmm.
And I recently, and I'll give it, if anybody wants it, I have like a short 1-page Google Doc of supplements that I either recommend or take personally. Just remind me to give this to you, Sean. You can give it out. And links to the research. So links to the actual studies that have been done. And I hold a pretty high standard for the studies that I'll admit. But ashwagandha is one of those. And there's been a lot of high quality research on ashwagandha. It's an adaptogenic herb. So
Mm-hmm.
it's an herb that helps your body essentially better cope with and deal with the negative effects of stress. So it's not a magic thing by any means, but there has been good research to show that this can help with anxiety, especially quite effective for anxiety and stress. There's some marginal evidence that it might have a positive effect for testosterone, but I think that might be kind of more of an indirect. I have a speculation that might be more indirect for its effects on stress generally.
Yep.
And same thing with weight loss, right? Is that some of these supplements, they aren't like fat burning supplements, but if you get your stress down, if you start sleeping better and you're worrying less, chances are you'll have an easier time with your workout and diet routine. So there's kind of an indirect effect there as well. So yeah, no, I'm a fan. It seems like, this is a healthy, sustainable supplement. There's tons of positives, virtually zero drawbacks. As with any supplement, you got to watch for, contraindications with certain medications. So just keep that in mind. Run it by your doctor, all the basics. But the research on this one's really good. So if people are feeling stressed, anxious, neurotic, obsessive compulsive, and you're doing, you're focusing on the lifestyle at large, this is something I think is definitely worth considering.
I like your take, and that well stated too. I've been taking ashwagandha from different companies off and on for a few years for that reason, for stress management. Like we talked about in previous episodes, we both have anxiety and we do our best to accept that and manage it. Serendipitously, back in February, I had the creator of HANA One supplements on the show, and his name is Joel Einhorn, and he was in Europe and sustained a pretty bad bicycle accident, and he got an Indian doctor, Ayurvedic doctor, and he recovered. And in process of recovering, learned about ashwagandha and turmeric and a bunch of other adaptogens, and so he hooked me up like a half-year supply of it. So I've got some good quality stuff over here, and it's kind of fun to test it out and see what you do feel. And I just put a teaspoon, about a teaspoon in my coffee in the morning, and nice and calm.
Yeah, it's so what do I use? I switch back and forth between brands. Gaia Herbs, they seem to be pretty decent. Yeah. And then I have one right now I'm taking that's a probiotic that has ashwagandha in it.
Interesting.
It's called Mood Probiotic. So yeah, people might want to check that out. And I like it.
Sweet.
What's the company? It might be Garden
of Life.
Garden of Life, or yeah, I think it might be Garden of Life.
Yeah. Yeah, they're, like you said, supplements are a supplement, and I have taken a lot of supplements and I've reviewed a lot of supplements. Some really do improve. They do.
Right, and there's some where the research hasn't. There isn't a ton of research, but maybe there's enough, and I think that there's room for responsible kind of self-experimentation there as well. Right. So I'll give you an example. One that has a decent amount, I think, of support in the research, but it's not like as strong as ashwagandha. Is Bacopa. Bacopa?
Yes. Yep.
But that's one, when I take that personally, I definitely notice a difference when I take that one. So that's one where I was looking, I'm like, okay, it seems like there might be enough to suggest that this might be beneficial. And I started taking it. And realize people with adaptogens, sometimes it takes a little bit of time before you really notice. Some people have told me that they feel better like almost instantly. And that's awesome. For me, there's usually, I don't know how long it is exactly, but it's more of a cumulative effect for me.
I would second that for sure. I think in our American culture, we're used to instant reaction. Like, we want it now. Whereas you will like this. Actually, when I was in the Strong Endurance seminar, the very first one when Pavel was teaching it, and you have like, a lot of our mentors and colleagues there, and he did touch on the Russian way of supplementation, adaptogens, stuff like that, as opposed to like the Western way of like stimulants and stuff like that. And from his research, what he's read, and obviously he's Pavel, so he's done his homework. Better results, more sustained, more consistent with the more, peaceful, the more organic approach to it, as opposed to the quick fix.
Yeah, I can definitely see why that would be the case. And look, I'm holding my coffee here, so I do love my stimulants. I moderate it though. I rarely go more than 2 cups of coffee. I just can't. I won't function if I have too much of it.
Right.
But it's one of those things where it helps to kind of knit you back together. And there will be many, I think, indirect effects, such as your sleep quality will improve. And once that happens, I mean, everything else is better off at that point. So what are my 3 favorites that have worked really well for me in the stress department? Ashwagandha, rhodiola, that would be the other one.
Oh yeah, good call.
And Bacopa. Those would be my 3 adaptogens that for Pat Flynn, I know some people have, had awesome results from other ones that I've kind of cycled in, but no noticeable difference. I don't want to write those off. I'm saying for me on the stress and anxiety, it's been those 3.
Nice. I can second you on those. Those are all fantastic ones. And then as far as like minerals, which I think get overlooked, I take a supplement called Calm at night.
Yeah, the magnesium one.
Yeah. I love it. It's like effervescent. Again, with magnesium, ease into it. Too much magnesium
can have a cleansing effect.
Get too much cleansing. Yeah. So it's definitely get some and ease into it. But that and zinc usually at the same time. Sometimes I'll just take ZMA, just get both.
Yes.
And that's kind of a fun supplement. One of the unique, I don't say off-label or side effects is like very lucid dreams. Ever experienced that with the ZMA?
Yeah, that's one of the more interesting things of supplementation, is to see how it affects your dreaming. Yeah. Sometimes quite profoundly and in interesting ways.
Yeah, I took my ZMA last night, and I had the same dream like 4 or 5 times this morning, where I kept going in to change the outcome to an outcome I liked.
Yeah. Do you ever have the one where you're dreaming?
Oh yeah,
all the time, right? Like, oh yeah, I'm dreaming, and I can sometimes wake myself up.
Right. It's true. I think that's when I'm in a good place mentally and emotionally, I can acquire those kinds of dreams more frequently. If I'm more stressed out or not taking care of myself, I don't feel like I have as good a quality dreams, or I don't recall the dreams as much.
Right. One way you can know you're dreaming is you won't be able to read.
Oh, I did not realize that.
Next time you're dreaming, try reading something.
Cool. That's good. I didn't know that.
I'm pretty sure I got that from the original Batman animated series.
Classic.
There's an episode, I forget all the details, where somebody put him into a deep sleep, and eventually he figures out that he's dreaming, because I think 2 things. He couldn't he couldn't read the newspaper was one of the things. And that's true. That's actually true. Like, for whatever reason, whatever part of the brain you're using in sleep, you can't read in your dream. So that's kind of a litmus test, right? If you're kind of like in this Cartesian, I don't know what's real or not, kind of uber skeptical mode, you can at least apply that and see.
Oh, that's cool. You got all the cool tips, Pat. I always have like notes, like
those 90s cartoons come in handy every now and then.
They do. I actually went back and watched the Batman's back to back a few months ago. That was very enjoyable. Very good.
Yeah, the 1989's, not to hijack the conversation in a pointless direction, but this stuff fascinates me. Will always be my favorite, because I mostly grew up with those, Batman Returns. Oh, sure. Michael Keaton. Yeah, the Michael Keaton. The Dark Knight trilogy is fantastic. I think they are objectively probably the best Batman movies. I have to say, though, I didn't hate Batman vs. Superman like everybody else did. I like that. Yeah, that was great. Yeah. Yeah, it was just good old-fashioned, romping good time. Yeah. No, I think the DC ones were actually underrated again. Like, Wonder Woman was fantastic. Aquaman, very entertaining. Yeah. Well, speaking of movies, movie I saw most recently that really, really impressed me. I'm a big Guy Ritchie fan. Gentlemen. I don't know if you've seen this yet. No, I have not seen it. Ooh, it's good. But I think this might be a Guy Ritchie movie, The Man from U.N.C.L.E. Have you seen
Oh
that?
yeah, I love that one. Yep, that's great.
Yeah, so Alex Salkin was out. He's been on your show. He was staying with us
Great
for a week,
guy.
and we just watched that movie 2 nights ago. Awesome movie.
So fun. Here's my guilty pleasure. When I go camping, which is twice a week, I'm going camping probably tonight. On my iPad, I'll put movies like that because I don't get to watch them all the time at home, and so I'll rewatch them over and over. I can probably do all the whole movie dialogue. It's such a fun. It's got the nice soundtrack. It's a fun movie.
Yeah, a little what I call it, glamping, right? Glamour camping.
It's definitely glamping. Like, yes, I camp in blizzards and I'll backpack and do all this hardcore stuff. But most of the time, my excuse is to go shoot product videos, wear our dogs out, play some guitar, have an adult beverage or two, and enjoy the outdoors.
Yeah, I love it, man. That's I can get on board with that kind of camping.
It's so fun, and you meet more interesting people too. Like, so I was up at a spot 2 nights ago camping. And I have my roof nest tent, which is like on top of my 4Runner. It pops up. And again, it's glamping. I have 2 like 4-season tents in the truck that I will use, but just easy camping. And this couple from Florida rolls up, and they were like just so enamored by it. So I gave them the walk through tour, and then they went out and picked one up from Roof Nest, which is here in Boulder, Colorado. So just little connections here and there, and it's just cool to connect people to the right things so they can enjoy the outdoors more with their families. Totally an organic setting, just hanging out with my dogs.
Yeah, I love it, man. We're Wisconsin. We're flatlanders here, so not too many mountains. We got a few. Well, what we would call mountains, you guys would probably call hills, or just bumps in the road. But it's beautiful territory. We've been getting outside, hiking a little bit more, so it's nice. Yeah, it's all good. I love the Midwest. I really do.
It's beautiful. Yeah, I grew up in Nebraska, and obviously Nebraska is very flat. There is one section right where it touches Iowa that has these beautiful, beautiful bluffs. From my understanding, the only other place in the world that has these kind of bluffs is in China somewhere. Not been,
really?
Can verify. But yeah, it's really beautiful. Alex knows all about it. Fontenelle Forest. It's really pretty. Other than that, Nebraska's real flat.
So I've heard. Yeah. Well, that's good to know because I want to start exploring more of the Midwest. So.
Omaha's a good town, especially if you go visit Alex out there. It's worth it.
That's exactly the plan. Yeah, we figure we don't have any other summer plans, so we might as well just start driving around the country.
I'm with you on that, for sure. If it is open, the Omaha Zoo, Henry Dorley Zoo, is worth checking out.
It's funny because Alex has said that this is like the best zoo in America, and I believe him. It's funny because states will have things that are unique to them that really are kind of the best thing. So in Milwaukee, we have Summerfest. I don't know if you've heard of Summerfest.
Not yet.
Well, so here's a classic example where I have to try and explain to people like, no, trust me, believe me. Wisconsin actually has the world's biggest music festival every single year. And nobody like Wisconsin. No, seriously, it's a 2-week-long music festival. There's major headliners every single night and a bunch of like, B, C level bands that maybe were A level bands in years past. People like Alice Cooper, for example, or Deep Purple, and they're on kind of like the sub stages. Wow. And it's right on Lake Michigan, and there's tons of different stages. So there's country stages, rock stages, all the different genres of music, all kinds of. It's all sponsored by the beer companies, of course. So they bus people in, and it is legitimately the world's largest music festival that nobody's ever heard about every year in Wisconsin.
I didn't know that.
Not this year, obviously, with everything going on. It's all been canceled. But yeah, normally.
Wow. Well, I'll put that in the calendar for next summer.
Come on up, man. I'd love to take you down.
Yeah, maybe we'll start a really bad band. Like the last festival I went to was Mile High Music Festival. And like I said, had some, adult mushrooms and formed a band later that night after watching Steve Miller and Jack Johnson perform together.
Right. Yeah. I'm pretty sure Steve Miller's been at Summerfest a number of times. There was always those bands that played every single, like Tom Petty was there every single year until he passed away. He was always a headliner.
Cool.
Just people like that. Yeah.
Oh yeah. We'll come up there and check it out. Well, I learned something kind of interesting too. I was hanging out playing Mexican Train with my in-laws, and my stepfather-in-law was a big fan of classic rock, which I am too. And he mentioned that Woodstock took place during not a pandemic, but an epidemic, like one level below what we're currently in. I
heard that. I did not know that either, but I did see that going around recently.
Yeah, very interesting. So I went and purchased the Woodstock movie, which is actually really good. It's like 3 hours long. It's a documentary, and it's beautifully shot. It's like like a Francis Ford Coppola style shot. It's
Really?
cool.
All
Yeah.
right. Well, I will put that on the list then, Sean. Thank you.
Worth checking out for sure. Well, speaking of, this is the topic, the big elephant in the room. We've had some good discussions on anxiety, about how business has changed for a lot of people because of the coronavirus, and there's been a lot of changes and adaptations and stuff. And some people are doing better with it than others. And you've obviously been great at creating content and getting your people in your strong arm group engaged and being a good leader. It's really inspiring to see. But you sent out an email a few days ago, very gracefully talking about, the current situation. And before we push record, we were having a good talk on this. And as a media company myself, as Engearment, I think media has a responsibility to portray things as accurately as possible. And I don't feel like most media is doing that right now.
Not at all.
Making a very dangerous situation even more dangerous. It's kind of frustrating to see.
Yeah, it's bad. It's really bad. And we were kind of speculating the different reasons why media companies do this: profits, ratings, agendas. And I'm sure it's a myriad of different factors. But I think what can't be denied is that they do this, right?
Yeah.
That they do feed into anger. They do feed into division. So, what do we do about that? And, me and you are both leaders in community. So I think that, there are responsibilities that we have to try and address these things. And so much of what I try to do, especially on my podcast or my platform, and because people ask me this quite often, is like, why don't you have a political segment, right? You have philosophy segment, you have theology segment. Why aren't you talking about contemporary political issues or candidates? And, maybe I'm wrong about this, Sean. I'd actually, be curious to get your feelings on this, because it's kind of one of the first times I kind of address this directly, is that the core of my mission and the core of my brand, and I do this as much in philosophy and theology, and philosophy is my more formal academic background, right? Fitness is just a very seriously studied hobby. People sometimes just assume that my degrees are in fitness. They're not. My degrees are in economics and philosophy. My position has been, one, I don't want to create unnecessary barriers to entry to what I feel are matters that are essential for human flourishing, matters of philosophy and theology, and that can be long-lasting and transformative. And as soon as you bring up a contemporary political topic or candidate, everybody brings in their prejudices and their preconceptions and their motivated reasoning, and it's immediately divisive, and people will immediately have a different perspective on everything else that follows from that. And I'm a highly political person in my private life, but in my public life, I try to remain as apolitical as possible so I can focus on the fundamental principles. In philosophy, that would be metaphysics and ethical reasoning. In the sense that if you can get these right, my hope, and maybe it's a naive hope, maybe it is naive, is that you can then figure everything else out downstream for the most part. Maybe you need some help with some specific issues. Everybody does. But I take the same general approach with fitness as well. I'm not always constantly critiquing any new particular fad or trend that comes up. It's principles, fundamentals. What do we know as our starting points? And then how can we think straight to make the best decisions downstream? And again, my hope, maybe it's naive or not, is that by focusing on these sort of core fundamental principles, not spending as much time at the tip of the iceberg, but at the bottom of it, I find that it can be much more unifying, because my audience is incredibly politically diverse. I mean, I got so many email responses to that from all over the political spectrum. And I had incredible, yesterday was just spent just having political conversations with people, very productive, very charitable.
Oh, good.
So that was, in fact, extremely, I had one or two, enraged people, but I get enraged people no matter what I talk about.
I hear you on that.
But the vast majority was people saying how much they appreciated that email, and whether they agreed with everything or not. Fruitful conversation was had. And the other funny thing, I'll just mention this in passing, was that almost alternately in emails, somebody said, you might be far more conservative than I, or you might be far more liberal than I. So like they were alternating. One person said I'm too conservative, another person says I'm too liberal. So I'm like, I don't know if that means I'm doing something right or I'm being like too balanced or what. But that was just kind of an interesting thing. So that's my general stance on why I don't focus on contemporary political topics or candidates. Not because I don't think they're important, but because they're often fleeting in a way that the deeper fundamental principles are not. And you can't make sense of the superficial issues if you don't have a grasp of the fundamentals first.
Well, that was great. Yeah, I dig that. Yeah, that was really well put. Like you, I have my own personal beliefs, and I don't think it benefits anybody, myself included, to go out there and try and persuade people to see my point of view on politics or religion or whatever. So I don't post about it. Not that I don't think about it, like you said. Definitely we talk about it. It's very important stuff. But I don't feel that my businesses are in a place that would benefit, coming at an angle, So I think what you wrote was fantastic in the email. It was just, yes, I'm is obviously thinking about it, but here's my take on it. And basically it comes down to, we're all in this together, maybe not the same boat, but on the same storm or whatever together. Mm-hmm. We're all doing our best to show compassion and love and be curious about each other, and trying to see other points of view. And like you said, the moment you come, my perception at least, the moment you come at a situation with like a black and white or yes or no kind of response, it turns a lot of people off. It turns me off.
Well, you'll certainly create, like, I could take a political stance on anything, and I actually don't think it would necessarily hurt my business. And in fact, there's often direct marketing advice that people will give us, say, like, no, make your business highly political because it will more enthuse a certain type of audience, right? So people, I have no doubt that certain business owners do it for pure profit reasons.
I know,
right? Pure profit reasons. Yeah. That's it. So, don't always be so quick to think that these political brands are necessarily on either side or necessarily as virtuous as they often pretend to be with their slogans. Some might be, don't get me wrong. Some very well might be. But yeah, for me, so that email was about everything that's been going on recently, but especially the rioting, right? And whether rioting is morally justified. And so my background in philosophy is predominantly metaphysics, but also ethics. And philosophy, I think the best definition of philosophy is just thinking really hard about things. That's what philosophy ultimately is. It's a love of wisdom, is the classic definition. And the method of philosophy is one of discovering and making important distinctions that really make a difference, and trying to develop prudence. So you have this practical good reasoning that you can take into various situations and have clarity on moral issues. That's why the study of ethics and philosophy is really important. And to answer a question of whether rioting or even violence or aggression is morally justified, there's so much that goes into that. Mm-hmm. And we can talk about that. I would love to talk about these things. But, one thing that should be said is, in times of great emotional distress is not the time when you typically want to start a philosophical project, right? But it is important to understand that morality enters the scene with rationality. Right? It's because we are rational agents that makes moral decision-making possible. We can consider things under different conceptual descriptions, right? I can consider you as Sean, a guitarist. I can consider you as a podcaster. I can consider you as a husband, under all these different conceptual descriptions. Mm-hmm. And depending on where I choose to focus, I can direct myself, right? I can orient my will towards, that's how free will works, right? Yeah. People totally missed the free will debate with a lot of sloppy metaphysics and stuff. But free will kind of falls out of having an intellect, of being able to understand things under different conceptual frameworks, under different abstract concepts, and then being able to focus and orient yourself, in relation to those different perspectives. And so once you have that as rational agents, you have the ability to choose. You can, and the ability to decide based on the kind of the space of reasons, if you want to call it that, is you can then either choose rightly or wrongly, right? But if you don't have that ability, if you're not a rational agent, morality isn't even on the table. You're not even a moral agent. But here's the thing. As soon as you start to go based on purely emotions, right, and you're not reasoning anymore, then you're undermining the very faculty that makes moral decision making possible in the first place. So sometimes people push back and they say, oh, you philosophers and your highfalutin, armchair ivory tower thinking. And like, I get that. I want philosophy to be practical. I think that we should be doing everything we can to make a just society. But to make a just society, we have to first have some concept of what justice even is. And then we have to have concepts of what are the different ways to achieve justice, ideas of whether you can achieve justice through unjust means. That's an important consideration. So I am fully with the practical side. I want a just society as much as anybody else. But to even suggest that implies that we at least have to have some understanding of what justice means in the first place. So those are just kind of some, I guess, preliminary notes that lead into a otherwise very complicated conversation.
Those are great notes. Yeah, it's always fun talking with you about big concepts. You have a very, very good way of breaking them down. Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit more about that if you like. That's
sure.
Yeah, so please, elaborate.
Yeah, so I mean, let me just say first, and I think most obviously, and sometimes it's good just to remind ourselves of the obvious basics, that everybody should be outraged and more outraged at the destruction of innocent human life than physical property. Everybody. And the reason for this is that human life has intrinsic value, whereas physical property only has instrumental value, right? And the only reason, this is one of those distinctions in philosophy that is important. The only reason we care about things like property or privacy in the first place is because of what they attach to and what they help to ultimately maybe flourish in some sense, which are human beings, right? Yeah. So it makes no sense in any debate. And these are kind of the principles I lay out to hope, people can think through on various issues, to subvert that hierarchy of goods, to subvert that hierarchy, to somehow put property rights above life rights. It just makes no sense. The only reason we care about property is in an instrumental sense to the thing of intrinsic value that attaches to human life. Now you got to do some, I guess, deeper metaphysics to kind of support, well, why does human life have intrinsic value? That itself is a very interesting and important question. And sometimes in society, we need to even have that debate because not everyone takes that as an assumption. There are moral nihilists out there, right? Moral subjectivists. And so you can see how just a conversation like this could take you down any number of rabbit holes, right?
Oh yeah. I like the word moral nihilists. I've never heard that combination. That made sense.
Yeah, well, nihilists would just hold that there are no objective moral values, duties, obligations, intrinsic worth, anything like that. So I mean, that's kind of the first question of ethics and morality, right? Is just the big question of, is there a meaning, a purpose, or an objective highest good for human beings? And if you answer yes on that, then a whole bunch of other questions open up. But predominantly, what is it, right? What is it? If you answer no on that, well, then the kind of ethical system then is kind of closed. It's case closed. And then the question becomes, well, what explains why we've been so severely diluted through human history, right? And that's where you would be something of a moral nihilist, right? And you try to account for this massive delusion where we experience this realm of what I call objective moral values and obligations. Now, when I say objective, I mean mind independent. It's binding regardless of what we think about it. In the same sense that, Sean, you are objectively there. Like if I evaporated, Sean would still be there. You do not depend on my thinking, right? So we certainly perceive, like when we say that, hey, slavery is really wrong, we're saying something like about a true state of affairs, not just a matter of taste or opinion, for example, right? This is the kind of distinction between an objective morality and a purely subjective. And in philosophy, this kind of breaks down between camps known as moral realists, which I am, that morality is a real feature of the world. It's not necessarily a physical feature like this coffee mug, but it's a real feature, right? And it's something that we discover, not invent, right? That's essentially my position. And again, I think we need some deeper metaphysics to explain why that's the case. And we can go there if we want. Whereas, moral subjectivists would take the opposite approach. They would say it's something that we purely invent, right? It's either something fobbed off from the socio-evolutionary process, or it's an artifact of culture, or something like that. They have their different attempted explanations, and these are radically different worldviews. Yes, radically different, with radically different consequences, as you might imagine. So most ethicists, most philosophers are moral realists. They are, but there's strong minorities of moral subjectivists and nihilists out there as well. So yeah, so we have to be ready to have those debates, and I could try and make the case for moral realism if we want it, because that's kind of a fundamental point, right? If moral realism isn't true, then it makes no sense to talk about right or wrong behavior, right? It just the only interesting question then is why are we so deluded, right? Yeah. Well, and there might be conditional statements like, okay, we're deluded, but if we want this type of outcome, then maybe we should do this. But there's nothing to say that we should necessarily want this type of outcome. Like, if we want a society where people treated equally, then we should do this. But there's no reason to think that people being treated equally is really of any objective moral significance or something like that, if that makes sense.
It kind of does. Yeah. I'm going to add on something you said a couple minutes ago about material. So since the last time I talked to you, my truck was broken into and all my stuff was stolen. And when I say stuff, wasn't just like a backpack. It was all of my camping and backcountry and splitboarding stuff. And, a lot of, I mentioned that, and a lot of people reached out, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I'm totally fine. The only thing I'm bummed about is the memory cards and the cameras, because those have visual memories I can't replace. Everything else is just stuff. And, we have our insurance, and the insurance came through. I replaced most of the stuff. It's great.
Yeah. But the other thing I was going to say is that even though people should be more upset about the destruction of innocent human life, that doesn't mean they shouldn't be not upset about the destruction of people's or the theft of people's property, right, and especially the destruction of people's livelihoods. So my ultimate position in that email is that you don't repay injustice with injustice.
Yeah, exactly.
And that. And this is a basic principle of moral reasoning. It undermines the very concept of justice to begin with, which is giving to someone what they are owed. Justice has to do with deserts. And so, yeah, there's an asymmetry there. Some things are more morally significant and important than others. But we can consistently say that while people should be more upset about the destruction of innocent life, people can be and still should be upset when other innocent parties are being actively harmed under the false flag of justice.
100% agree. I mean, my heart goes out to all the small businesses who are already struggling so much, and then now their storefronts bashed in. That's horrible. I mean, nobody benefits in that situation, and it's very painful to see that.
It is. And, many of these people are the local community owners. I mean, so many of them have spoken out. Let me make a clear distinction that the rioters are not protesters, and the protesters are not necessarily rioters, right? And I think one of the other issues of the rioting, aside from, so first off, let me be clear that I don't think that violence and aggression are per se immoral. And so what I tried to highlight in the email. Rather, it's the object of violence and aggression that is the relevant moral issue. Is the object of the violence and aggression an innocent party? Because then if so, whatever theory of like a just war that you hold to, one of the principles of any just war is that you do not inflict harm onto innocents, right? So I do think there are instances when violence, aggression, or force can be merited, but it has to have a proper object and it has to have a proportionate response and so on and so forth. So I'm not an extreme pacifist, don't get me wrong. But many of these people who are now not just losing, and people are saying things about insurance. I don't know about you, Shaw, but my business, I had to like pay extra to get insurance that would cover anything like this. And I opted out of it because I didn't expect that my business would. So I think it's foolish to assume that insurance is just going to step in for any of these businesses. But now it's gone past the point of just the property. Now actual people are being harmed, killed in these riots, innocent people. So now we are back to the destruction of innocent life. This wasn't the case a couple of days ago, but now we're getting a real body count of innocent people. And that's grievously unjust. And especially for somebody like George Floyd, who my understanding was somebody who was not only a Christian, but whose I think now brother and wife have strongly spoken out and say this would have devastated him. This is no way to honor his legacy and demand justice for him.
Right.
So not only is it unjust in principle what we're seeing going on, but I think it's also taking away from something that is important, that does demand justice. And there's a hijacking going on here. And, I think most people that I talked to could see that, but it is difficult to see because emotions are really hot. But this is kind of to the point I was talking about before, is emotions aren't what guides morality. It's reasoning. Sometimes we have to squint hard and think about this. And the thing that I'm kind of pushing back against is kind of a modern assumption of consequentialism or utilitarianism, where, the cliche is sometimes we just need to break a few eggs to make an omelet. And this is, I think, immoral and irrational thinking, and taken to its logical terminus could be used to justify any horrible thing, and has been, including the death of George Floyd. I mean, imagine if somebody said, you know what, structural change is so needed that maybe George Floyd's death was that necessary broken egg that we needed. And nobody wants to agree with that. But once you let the utilitarian horse out of the barn, there's no principled way to bring it back in again. If we care about justice, we have to care about justice full stop. And we need an appropriate idea of what justice is before we can even have these conversations. And they're hard conversations. I don't deny that they're hard conversations, but they're important conversations.
They are. And I'm glad we're having this open dialogue. A lot of people steer clear of it, or they take a predetermined path and just copy and paste. So it's nice to have real discussion about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, it's easy to voice and vent outrage on social media. And I'm not saying that outrage isn't merited. I think outrage is often merited. I think if there's certain situations don't make you angry, then there's a moral problem, right? But if you're letting those passions overrule the right, rational, moral decision-making, then that itself is a problem. So, yeah, I mean, those were just, some initial thoughts. And again, overwhelming. I had so many good conversations, not only with people on the blue, but I had a great guy from Chicago. I won't mention his name because I didn't ask to, but he's, African-American business owner, and he can't believe what's going on. And this is not from, what he would consider anything of the riots. Let me again be clear. I think the protests for any type of injustice are not only not only morally justified, but often required and often needed.
Yeah, I'm all for peaceful protests. In fact, I'll add to this. Our police chief for Denver joined in the protest like 2 days ago. Not the riot,
right.
Of course, the protest. The right way to do it. Show solidarity. Same
here in Waukesha. We had a beautiful coming together of the local police precincts and the protesters, not just marching together, but praying together, and like this awesome bonding and unity. So there is really good stuff. It's not being again, we talk about the media. It's not really being highlighted by the media at all. Yeah. But there's actually really good stuff coming out, and I can offer nothing but my full support and endorsement of that. So that's why I keep, again, philosophy is like sometimes distinctions are subtle, but distinctions are important. We have to be able to make these distinctions if we're going to have any type of productive and charitable conversation.
No, that's great. Thanks for having the courage to talk about that. That was very helpful for a lot of people, I'm sure, listening to this and viewing this. Yeah. All right. We tackled that elephant in the room. That was great.
Yeah. It is important. And I'm not a practicing ethicist. I have a lot of friends who are, and so the goal of the ethicist should be able to take these principles and apply them to hard cases. So there's hard cases out there where the answer isn't always immediately clear. That's not my specialty. I'm kind of in another realm of philosophy, but, yeah, those are some, I think, basic principles, or at least kind of starting points. But as we've seen in this conversation, even starting points need to be argued for. Starting points like intrinsic worth of human beings. Not everybody accepts that starting point. So how do we get there? Or the objectivity of moral obligations. Not everybody accepts that. But if you do accept those starting points, I think you can fairly easily get to the conclusions or the arguments that I've been trying to make.
Yeah, that was awesome. And yeah, well, I'm glad that it was so well received by your listeners and viewers and readers. It was a great email. I mean, I read it. I'm like, I gotta drop Pat a line and tell him how great that was. So,
Thank you.
I appreciate it. So, what else you cooking up over there? I know you have a lot going on with Strong On. Anything you want to mention?
Yeah, what's going on with Strong On right now? Just trying to keep people as fit, productive, and feeling good as possible in these exceedingly difficult times. They are exceedingly difficult times, aren't they? So trying to provide that community, that support, that encouragement. So what do we got? We just kind of wrapped up a challenge. It was a good one for Strong On. So we do kind of like 4 different quarterly challenges a year, each kind of with a different focus or emphasis. Sometimes we have a kind of strength focused challenge. Other times it might be more conditioning based or mobility based. And right now, I just had a conversation with Dan John, and we're kind of coming up with a kind of like a mini program. This will be free for anybody who wants it. Of just how do I describe it? We just talked about it on the last podcast. We didn't really come up with a name with it yet. I'm just kind of like a general physical preparedness program, and it's kind of a cool structure. If anybody's interested, I'll kind of give the basic highlight. With an emphasis on body composition and general health and strength and stuff like that. So you're not going to be like an professional Olympic lifter or bodybuilder, but I think you'll be able to check a lot of boxes. And, kind of coming from this perspective of minimalism, what's going to give us a high return, without, too significant of an investment. And we were kind of sketching this out on the last conversation I had with him. And we're both kind of fans of, at least having 1 or 2 days where you kind of train on the intensity extremes. And what we mean by the intensity extremes are something like a heavy, sweaty complex, something like that, right? So maybe you're doing it with kettlebells or barbells. You take some of the big fundamental movements, you move a good amount of weight, you're stringing some exercises back to back, you're tiring multiple muscle groups and energy systems simultaneously. You get a lot of systemic fatigue, but a good amount of strength work is, and some hypertrophy as well. So you hit that. Maybe for 15 to 20 minutes, you get a good session in there, but then you attach that to the other end of the intensity spectrum, which is a sort of extended lower intensity endurance effort, something like a brisk walk or rucking, hiking, something like that. And that's a really, I think, potent combination for a lot of stuff, certainly strength, body composition, and it just feels good too.
Yeah.
And it's fun, and the weather's getting nice. So, you hit it. That's my plan today. Hit a couple complexes, go for a nice, really long walk.
Oh, I love it.
So maybe you do that 2 to 3 days a week. And that's cool because, it'll be physiologically effective, but it can also be, and I think this is a key, psychologically interesting, because you can add enough purposeful variety into something like that it's fresh. And that's kind of the hidden variable in a lot of programming, in a lot of programs is, okay, we can have the quote unquote ideal program on paper, but how do we get people interested, excited,
Yeah.
How do we get them looking forward to this? Because, not everybody is has their sight set on being a world champion and will do absolutely anything, come hell or high water to, in their training. A lot of people, they want training itself to be enjoyable, to be fun, not just the outcome.
You know what? This is a fun topic, and I like talking with fitness professionals about this. I have some clients and students who are very focused on their goals, and so we break it down very systematically, and we tackle it and track everything. The progress is almost always going up, which is crazy awesome. But by and large, I don't know what you've experienced, but by and large, people I work with want a bit of training and entertaining. So my friend came up with the word entertraining.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, Ryan Humphreys, give him credit for that one. But it's true, something to get him excited, so not just so static. And then I love the idea of adding in outdoors, especially hiking. I mean, that's of course. And like you said, it's good physically. It's good to get the snowmobile fluid moving around. And it's just good up here too.
Yeah. I mean, for me, honestly, my kind of extended effort today will probably just be mowing the yard. But I like mowing the yard. I actually enjoy that.
Yeah, I feel you, man. Mine is replanting a bunch of herbs. We're growing a bunch of herbs in my garden, on our deck. So I've got a couple 100 pounds of dirt to play with. That's my afternoon.
That counts, my friend. All of it is good.
Yeah.
So no, I'm with you totally. You know, for a lot of people, especially a lot of people I work with, you know, outcomes are important. They want to be healthier. They want to feel better. They want to look good. Awesome. No problem with any of that. But they also want their training itself to be interesting, to be engaging, to be challenging, to be fun. So I think as coaches, we have to keep those elements in consideration. And there's ways you can intelligently do that. And I remember, you know, in a lot of our kind of strong on classes back in Pennsylvania, you know, we try to incorporate almost elements of gaming, you know. You know, a lot of partner works, gamification of workouts. You know, we keep the principles there, we keep the fundamentals there, but we just want people to have a good time when they're doing it too. And they do. I think they generally do. So that would be, you want me to keep going through the framework of the, So what Dan and I also came up with, so maybe you do that 2 to 3 days a week. Then maybe you have like 2 dedicated kind of movement practice days. Maybe you take one as like a pushing and pulling day, and another one's like a hinging and squatting day. Some just kind of classic strength work there. Then you have at least one kind of tonic day, one tonic mobility day. You know, Dan and I really like the original strength stuff, you know, a lot of the kind of neurodevelopmental patterns. I still like old school stretching as a martial artist. I actually do like, you know, you have to do it right. You have to do it right, but good old fashioned Taekwondo stretching it works. Now, I also want to emphasize that the kind of mobility work, the tonic work, we want to do that all the time. But I think it's worth having at least one day where we really emphasize that or focus on that.
That's really cool. You know, here in August, if things go great, I'll be doing the Festival Steel certification with Matthew Flaherty. And he's on the podcast 2 weeks ago. And we did a drill together called the Poltergeist, where basically you increase your range of motion in your neck, and like in about 2 minutes, it's on the video, you watch my head like go significantly farther.
The Poltergeist, yeah.
So I'm with you. I every day I do mobility stuff. First thing, like you mentioned, I do it fasted. I get up even before I walk the dogs. Just I feel better. My posture's better. I think better, and then it helps.
100%. Yeah. So frequency is very important for that. But, you know, having like one dedicated day where I'm just going to do this stuff, I think is a nice little boost and addition. And then me personally, I also like to have a day of kind of, I call it a variety day. I don't know if it is because I kind of practice a lot of the same stuff, but you just practice something. For me recently, it's been handstands, for example.
Oh, fun.
And then, you know, it's also kind of an improvisation day. Maybe that's the better way to put it, where I'm not going to crush myself. I'm not going to usually lift a lot of heavy weights on this. And it's mostly body weight exercises, but I was at the park the other day and I went in just with the intention to practice some hand balancing and stuff, which just always feels good, and some hanging. But then I started running, and then I started sprinting, and, you know, just kind of organically evolved, you know, So I guess kind of different ways to think about it. It's just kind of a free movement day, improvisation day, whatever you want to call it, where you just get out there and maybe you focus on a skill. I like the idea of focusing on a skill, like handstands or something like that. Juggling. I don't care. Any skill you want that's movement involved, go for it. You know, anything like that. Just handstands have been interesting to me. And then, you know, if something else feels good, go for it. And I think especially when it's getting nice outside, just having days like that.
Yeah. All about the outdoor workouts, especially now. The weather here in Denver is amazing. It's green. There's butterflies out. It's beautiful.
Are you guys like, so in Wisconsin here, it shocks me because like our spring feels like 2 days. It's just like ominous winter, one rainy week, and then boom, everything's suddenly green.
Yes. Yeah, there's like a switch got flipped. I'm like, spring was in there, I'm sure, here in Colorado.
But I didn't see it.
I didn't see it. No, I was probably watching Batman or something when it happened.
Yeah, and the quarantine didn't help either.
Yeah, time became kind of fluid here the last 3 months. It just it's kind of hard to grab a concept of it.
Yeah, I'm with you. But anyway, that's what recently working on. So it was just kind of sketching that out with Dan. And we're going to turn that into just like a little free PDF. We're just going to give it away to anybody who wants it. So just, let's say if you want a written version of that, just next week on the podcast, when I talk to Dan, we should have it done.
Oh, fantastic. I look forward to that. That's great content from 2 great coaches. That's awesome. Well, I will put notes for that for sure. And is your podcast on Wednesday with Dan?
Indeed. Yeah, usually we record on Tuesdays, and I typically pop it up on Wednesday. Sometimes I get it up the day of, depending if we get it done early enough or not.
Gotcha. Yeah, podcasts aren't easy to edit and put up, as we've talked about.
No, they're a lot more work than I think a lot of people may assume. But they're also great fun, and so I encourage people, if you're thinking about it, because I was somebody who I started my podcast because of my latest book, How to Be Better at Almost Everything. I started it because I wanted to interview people I thought were generalists and kind of have a sounding board of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really just for the book. But then I really fell in love with it. I'm like, I actually like this, and it gives me an excuse to talk to people I find really interesting. And then, it grew on its own, and now it's just its own thing. But I didn't intend for it to be.
How funny. I like that. It's organic. It just evolved.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like you, I didn't intend to have a podcast, but I realized with Engearment, we get to interview a lot of companies like, like Patagonia. Like, check this out. This just came in the mail, and my wife colored it in. It's a box full of food. We got in here like smoked mussels and kamut. You ever heard of kamut? It's like a grain.
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's really tasty.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyways, well, we get to work with these companies and record the conversations, usually via video. And I was like, well, that's a podcast basically, right?
Right.
Just put it up. And then, like you said, like, it's so fun to reach out to people like you and like pick your brain and just have a nice dialogue. And it was really meaningful. Like, actually, when I was up camping the other night, there's only 2 other couples the whole night. And one of them mentioned listening to a podcast of you and I. And I was like, what kind of small world is this? This is great, right?
That's awesome.
Yeah. And they enjoyed it, and it helped them. And I don't know about you, but as a content creator, I just love to serve and create stuff. And if it benefits somebody and meet that person, really awesome.
Oh yeah. It's one of the greatest feelings in the world. Especially when you're not expecting it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm back.
There you are. I was like, oh, you disappeared. No, that's good. No, I mean, it really, it's kind of a cliche in a sense that, it's better than any of the money. And look, like, I got mortgages to pay. I need to make money too. But no, I can sincerely agree with that. When you see that you have somehow positively impacted, maybe in some cases radically helped transform somebody's life for the better. You sit back, and it's hard not to appreciate that.
It is. Yeah. It makes you
and be thankful for it too.
Oh, I love it. It makes it all worthwhile, the time and effort we put in. Here's a funny story. So that day I went up to go shoot videos. I shot 18 separate videos, in each one like 3 or 4 takes, and none of them turned out. So like the failure level is super high, right? But then you hear that, that one success, you're like, it was worth it. It's worth it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's funny. Yeah. If anybody out there is feeling, frustrated about, we call them false starts in writing, but they apply to everything. I mean, I don't even know, thousands of false starts in across my creative smorgasbord. I mean, podcasts that will never see the light of day, writing projects that just never came to be, probably never will come to be, videos, all of it. We all have these false starts, this iteration after iteration after iteration. But it's one of those, a lot of it is a numbers game, right? If you're just willing to keep stepping up and taking swings, you're going to miss a lot. You're going to connect with some, single here, double there. And then every once in a while, you're going to get that homer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people will see the homers a lot of times, but they don't see all the other swings at the bat. And they certainly never see your misses because you don't publish them. Mm-hmm.
That's so true. I'm glad we're talking about this, because sometimes I feel a little bit guilty when I see friends or our colleagues or, somebody out in the real world, less now than usual, but, they're like, oh, it's always rainbows and unicorns over there. And I'm like, oh, there is some rainbows and unicorns for sure, but man, there's a whole lot of mud.
Right.
But just keep swinging.
Yeah. Just keep that in mind, folks, that, it's easy to see, successes for anybody. But I think anybody that I've been inspired by, once you kind of dig into their biography and their details, they just say the same thing, right? Like, you didn't see all the terrible first rough drafts. You didn't see all the rejections. You didn't see all the edits. You just saw the final one finished product out of, so many different attempts. So
Absolutely. Well, I think that's really good advice to leave the listeners and viewers with.
rock on.
Yeah. I mean, just go out there and do it. It's going to suck. You're going to fail, but you keep plugging away. You're going to have some great results out of it. And it's going to be rewarding beyond any measure. So just keep doing it.
Amen.
Amen. Well, Pat, thank you so much for your time as always. Love you, man. You guys are doing great stuff out there in Wisconsin. And thanks for jumping on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sean. Always a pleasure.
Awesome. And to all you Engearment viewers and listeners out there, thank you for your time, and all the best to you and your families. Stay safe.